Welcome to 2016 Presidential Candidate Interviews. Today I am interviewing Morrison Bonpasse. Mr. Bonpasse is running as a Democrat. Hello, Morrison, and welcome to the interview. How are you doing today?
Finally, how are you?
I'm doing good.
Good.
Let's start with some icebreaker questions just so the listeners can become more familiar with you. Can you describe your family and your home life?
Sure. I'm married. I'm 67. I have 2 adult stepchildren and 3 grandchildren by my stepdaughter. I decided in my 20s not to have children and had a vasectomy at the age of 27, and feel that was a correct decision. I just want to point out that it's interesting you use the term icebreakers because President Obama spoke yesterday of the need for more icebreakers in the Arctic. And I frankly don't think we do need them, but that's another story. So go ahead.
All right. Can you explain or describe your employment experience, your work experience?
Sure. I went to law school and became a lawyer, and also graduated from business school, Babson College Business School. But I didn't practice law. Went into government service, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and then went to work for a Digital Equipment Corporation, which was the second largest computer corporation in the world. And worked for them, and then left them in 1995, and started my own company doing temporary staffing work. Then in around 2003, I became very interested and very concerned about wrongful convictions, and started my own sort of private investigator work. I was very interested in correcting several wrongful convictions that I learned about, and worked primarily pro bono for about 10 years. And now I'm starting a new business to import cork materials, cork fabric, cork pillows, and sell them on, and cork granules, and sell them on the internet. So the work experience has gone over a number of the government and private enterprise and small business.
What are your hobbies and interests?
Well, it's an interesting question. As I thought about that, my interest is exonerating wrongly convicted people and promoting a single global currency. That's what I do in my spare time at my computer. Hobbies, I just have to say they're the same as interests. I don't collect things because I can't take them with me when I leave this earth. So I have to say my hobbies are the same as my interests. I do wash dishes at the family dinners, but I wouldn't say that was a hobby.
Alrighty. What are your favorite places to eat out if you go out?
Well, we do eat out. My wife and I eat out on Friday nights, every Friday, and often other nights. And I just have to say I don't have a favorite. We have a funny tradition. We have a mile-long dirt road here, and we drive to the end of the road, and we don't make our decision which way we're going, left or right, until we get there. I like all foods. Of course, I live in Maine, so I'm partial to a Maine lobster shack, which where they're on piers out into the water, and often lobster and steamed clams are available. So that's a special treat. But there are others as well. I like foreign foods, domestic foods. Basically, I like to eat. Fortunately, my metabolism is such that I don't gain much weight. I have to watch, but I don't have to work too hard at it.
Okay, do you have a favorite, maybe fast food joint, a guilty pleasure you wouldn't, eat in front of your wife with?
That's fast food joint is an interesting phrase. Well, none in the usual sense. I do not think they. Until now, have been serving healthy foods. I had a friend who started a fast food, natural foods place called Au Naturals, but I'm afraid that business didn't succeed. But I do, however, like to go to Chinese restaurants, and hot and sour soup is available. It's always on the stove, so I call that fast food. Avocados are a favorite food, and they're fast because you open them up and you eat. And same with bananas and fruits. So I say those are my fast foods. I'm sorry, but that's also, I must say that I do, it's okay, guilty pleasure. McDonald's French fries are the best. And I've been known to go in and eat French fries and a shake.
Do you have any favorite junk food? You may have just answered that.
Yeah, I think I just answered that. But no, we shouldn't eat junk food by definition. However, I prefer to call my kettle-cooked potato chip as my fast food vegetable. So if you think potato chips are junk food, I have to plead nolo contendere on that one.
All right. Do you have any favorite TV shows or movies?
TV shows, no. I think television is a wasteland and has been for far too many years. It should be used for educating our people and less entertainment, and certainly far less violence. I've been known to watch series from the BBC and public television, but not U.S. TV shows. Movies, my long-term favorites were 2001, Space Odyssey, which I saw something like 22 times. King of Hearts, an anti-war film, World War I film, I've seen about 15 times. Paths of Glory was also a World War I by Stanley Kubrick, a film starring Kirk Douglas about the execution of 3 innocent people for desertion because they had to pick somebody. Glory is the movie about the Black Regiment that fought in the Civil War, Black Regiment from Massachusetts, when white people thought that black people wouldn't fight. And most recently I saw a wonderful movie called Testament of Youth, also about World War I. It was about the story of Vera Brittain, who lost her brother and her fiancé in the war. She served as a nurse in the war and afterwards became an anti-war activist. So there's a focus there, I guess. Another movie that on a different wavelength is Sleepless in Seattle. I really forget most of the plot, but the famous line is, "I'll have whatever she's having," which is one of my favorite quotes.
Okay. Do you have any pets? Dogs, cats, reptiles, pet rocks, anything?
Well, I do collect rocks from beaches, round rocks, round smoothed rocks, but I don't call them pet rocks. But I do, my wife and I had several dogs, and our last golden retriever died about 5 years ago, and it was such a loss. We had not replaced him. His ashes are buried out in our garden. I have a wonderful piece of quartz above the stone there for him, and we do travel sometimes, and pets are we don't have a place to take him, so we don't have an animal at this time. Maybe someday, but right now we don't. No.
Okay, and the final icebreaker question. Can you name a song that you consider your life anthem, your motto, something that represents who you are?
Well, I can think of two. One is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. I like Beethoven's work, and the Ninth Symphony was chosen by the Europeans as the European Union European anthem, and it's a symbol of unity among countries that far too often threw us into World War. And it's a wonderful. It was also a song dedicated to the reunification of Berlin. Another song is Blue Danube, a theme song from the movie 2001 by Johann Strauss. It's just a wonderful little song. But please know that I'm very. I have my rock and roll traditions: Queen, the Rolling Stones, Layla by Eric and the Dominoes. So I have sort of a versatile taste. But in terms of life anthem and motto, Beethoven's Ninth, I think, comes out top.
All right, and now into the questions that matter most. the first question. Why are you running for president?
Well, thank you for that good question. I initially thought that I would best bring to the public three signature issues that I thought were very important that weren't part of the normal presidential election discourse. And one issue is wrongful convictions. We're getting inured or used to weekly seeing that one or more inmates is being exonerated from 1 to 30, 40 years in prison for something he or she didn't do. This is the work I've been doing for the last 10 years, and I thought that it's very important to bring that to the attention of the public, that this is a big problem. There are approximately 30,000 wrongly convicted people in our prisons. Even though every week we see one or two released, there's no indication that that's just a small tip of the iceberg. The vast number of people are in prisons who are innocent. A second issue is stopping population growth. The world has 7.3 billion people, and that's, by my estimation, 6.3 billion too many. The world's population in 1800 was 1 billion. That, I think, is a fairly sustainable amount, and we should reduce the birth rate in this country and birth rates in the world to reduce them below the death rate. And the third issue is bringing the world to a single global currency. Just like the United States has one currency. We don't have 50 currencies. We have one. The European Union has one currency among 19 countries. And would eliminate transaction costs when you change money from one type of money to another. It would eliminate the need for foreign exchange reserves. It would eliminate the problems with devaluation. Last week, the Chinese devalued their currency by 1.9%, and the world suffered a giant hiccup. The American stock market lost 1,000 points in a day. That would not have happened if we had a single global currency. But, of course, there are other critical issues. By using those three issues, I'm running for president also because I have views on the very important issues facing the world. One is nuclear proliferation. I'm a strong supporter of the agreement with Iran among the United States and other great powers to not build weapons, and I think as part of the overall nuclear non-proliferation treaty, which was signed, became international law in 1971. It's part of a overall promise by the United States and the other nuclear powers to reduce their nuclear stockpiles and ultimately to get rid of nuclear weapons entirely. We should not have nuclear weapons on the earth. Another critical issue for me is the reduction of violence in our country and worldwide. We should have colleges of peace. We should teach mediation and arbitration rather than teaching war. Reduction in military spending. The world spends several $1 trillion a year on ways to kill one another. The United States has a military budget that is greater than the next 9 countries put together. It's really obscene, frankly, and that money could much better be used to support things for the good of humanity and the good of the earth, such as family planning services and food. Another issue is relating to global warming. The world is warming, and there's no question about that. And it's getting worse. The population growth is worsening it, but we are pulling more and more carbon out of the ground, which we should stop. We are deforesting our forests. Our deserts are growing. We have to be kinder to our planet and stop destroying it. And another issue, a final issue that I'll mention here is public indebtedness around the world, especially in the United States, let's say. John Maynard Keynes made a very good point back in the 20s and 30s that we should not be afraid to go into debt to push our way out of a recession or out of a depression. But I think the world has mistaken his message, and we have taken on much too much public indebtedness, dangerously so. We've seen some countries, Argentina, Greece, which became, in Japan, who have become excessively indebted. one or 1.5 times their total GNP. The United States, our national public debt is the equivalent of $240,000 for every single taxpayer in this country. That's just a phenomenal amount of money, $18 trillion, and we have to pay today for the services we buy today and the goods, and we should also start to pay off our national debt. Borrowing for emergencies is one thing, but borrowing when we are in prosperous times, I think, is immoral. So that's why I'm running for president. I hope to bring those attentions to the attention of the people. Of course, I'm realistic that my chances as a lesser-known candidate are slim, but I'm hoping that by people listening to this interview and others, some people may come forward and say, we'd like to help you. So that's why I'm running for president.
All right, thank you. What abilities do you bring to the office of president? Is there something maybe specific to you or just something you do good in general that you would bring to the office of president?
Well, I don't think I have anything unique compared to several others or compared to previous presidents, but I am very courteous to others, and I do listen. I always want, whenever I disagree with anybody about any issue, I'm always the first or one of the people to want to talk to those people and find common ground where we can find them. I'm a mediator by training. Recently took mediation courses and did some courtroom mediation. And I always think that the best thing to do is to talk to people who have different views and reach agreements. I'm knowledgeable about world history and the law. I went to Yale University and majored in history and sociology. I think I'm really knowledgeable about world history and law, as I think you have to be to understand where the world is today. And I've traveled around, mostly in Europe, to the world, some to Mexico, but mostly to Europe. And I've seen just a little bit of the devastation, even 100 years old, that's been caused by a concentration camp that war has brought to this world. And finally, an ability or aspect of myself that I bring to the office is I'm optimistic generally about the fate of the world. I'm optimistic about what people can do to correct this once they are known. I think it was Jefferson who said that, and there's nothing so valuable as an informed populace. And as I said earlier about television, we should use television not to entertain people so much, but to educate people. I think when people are educated, they will do the right thing. So that's what I would bring to the office, as well as I think a sense of humor and perspective. Let me just add one more thing. Unlike most of the other candidates, I've written books before I decided to run for president. Many of the books written by presidential candidates are either about themselves autobiographically or about their campaigns for president. And I've written books about the single global currency. I first wrote that book in 2004 and written 3 editions since then, the latest being 2014. I wrote a book, Perfectly Innocent, about a wrongly convicted man in Massachusetts named Alfred Trinkler, who is in prison, in federal prison, for the rest of his life until we get him exonerated for building a bomb that killed a Boston bomb squad policeman in 1991. Of course, Alfred Trinkler had absolutely nothing to do with that bomb. So that's a book I wrote in 2006. In 2012, I wrote a book called Eye Contact about a wrongly convicted man in New Hampshire named Chad Evans, who was wrongly convicted of murdering the 21-month-old daughter of his girlfriend, Cassidy Bortner. He did not. He certainly knew her, and he loved her, and I believe that she died of natural causes, and nothing that he did caused her death. Last fall, I began work on a book called 80 Proposals to Stop Wrongful Convictions. It was published after I filed with the Federal Election Commission, but I wrote most of it before my decision to run. And my decision to run, by the way, was prompted especially because I live in Maine, and New Hampshire is one of the key primary states. still until we get the system reformed. And I thought by running for president I could bring attention to Chad's case in New Hampshire, and I thought about that. So I think that's one good reason for running. And the final book is Too Many Humans, The Imperative to Return to a Human Population of 1 billion. I published that in April of this year after I decided to run for president. But it's not about me. It's about the Earth. It's about the need to bring the global birth rate to below the death rate. And by the way, if it's 1% below, if it's 1 per thousand below, it'll take the world about 400 years to return to a human population of 1 billion. We can do it. There are several countries on the earth right now that have birth rates below their death rates. It doesn't require anything immoral. It doesn't require anything sinister. This requires people to only have the children they want to bring into the earth, into the world, and use contraception and abortion where necessary to prevent the births of children that are not wanted, not predicted. So that's one unique thing I think I bring to the office. John Kennedy wrote Profiles in Courage when he was just out of college. But paraphrasing Lloyd Benson, I realize I'm no John Kennedy.
Okay. Are there any presidents that you look on with a favorable opinion? And if there are there aspects of their presidency you would try to emulate?
Yes, I can think of two. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was, of course, a great president. He happened to be president at the time World War II started. He might not have been recognized as so great if Hitler and Japan had not come across as starting wars, but he rose to their greatness. But the characteristic that I think was most important to my campaign is that he was willing to try new solutions to problems. He was not content to sit back and say, well, if I can't solve it the old way, I won't try. He tried a lot of ways. Many parts of the New Deal were new. The Tennessee Valley Authority, for example, was a new government program to reduce flooding in Tennessee and generate power for people who didn't have power. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt, for his willingness to try new solutions and to speak to the greater aspirations of mankind. He started the path to bring the world in the United Nations. It was created after his death, but he was able to think globally, not just about the United States. And the second president I am inspired by and would try to emulate would be John F. Kennedy. He had an extraordinary ability to inspire several generations of people. I grew up in the 60s, and John Kennedy was a miracle with a sense of grace and humor, which I would hope to bring to the office. But what comes to mind is his ability to learn from mistakes. He realized shortly after the Bay of Pigs invasion that he made a big mistake in going ahead with a plan that was approved by President Eisenhower, but John Kennedy didn't have the knowledge or the courage at the time to stop it. He learned from that mistake, and later in the October crisis of 1962, he chose not to go to war against the advice of many people in his cabinet. So he learned from his mistakes. Thank goodness. He later spoke about the need for disarmament. During his administration, he negotiated a nuclear test ban treaty. And thank goodness. At the time, in my lifetime, probably before your lifetime, countries were exploding nuclear weapons in the atmosphere. And he recognized this was a terrible thing to do. So John Kennedy, for his sense of grace and humor and ability to look far in advance. So those are my two that I would try to emulate. I would certainly fall far short. Please know this. It would be a miracle if I could be as good a president as those two men, but I would certainly try.
Are there any presidents you look on with disfavor and have aspects of their presidency you would not want to emulate? Who are those, and why would you avoid doing what they did?
Yes, both of them are named George Bush. George W. Bush, primarily for making war at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives and maiming and injuring hundreds of thousands more, including many wonderful Americans whose lives and the lives of their families have been irreparably damaged, and hundreds of billions of dollars. I think the cost of the war to the United States is over $1 trillion, where we're still paying for it through veterans' benefits. He brought a war against Iraq for no reason, no good reason, and we are still paying the price for that. We read of ISIS, the Islamic State, so-called, a religious fundamentalist group with weapons. We are responsible for the creation of ISIS because we destabilized the countries of Iraq and later Syria, and that was more under President Obama's watch. But the destabilization and ruin of government in Iraq and the subsequent destruction of the Iraqi army was just terrible decisions. And so I would hope to take a different course with almost every international dispute, not to go to war, not to use the military, but to negotiate and mediate. So I would hope I'd never have to go commit our troops and weapons to any kind of military action, and I don't believe we would have to. George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush's father, he was generally quite a good president, I believe, but I recall one aspect of his presidency and his candidacy that I find a mistake. He and members of his family had long been supporters of family planning and Planned Parenthood and the right to abortion. However, when he decided to run for president, I don't know the exact dates, but he changed his views to become anti-abortion, and I think that was cynically designed to win the election. I hope I'm never accused of changing my views in order to win election. I might change my views because I've learned something. I've learned some information that I didn't know before, but I hope to be educated and learn, but I don't ever want to be accused of changing my position just to win an election. So otherwise, I think the Bushes rendered immense public service. George H.W. Bush, he was in war. He and incidentally, both of those men went to the same private school I went to, Phillips Academy in Massachusetts. So I have some affection for them, but I would not want to emulate them for those two reasons.
Are there any functions of government you would like to decrease or even abolish?
Well, abolish, yes. I'd like to abolish the current government, the federal government, and state government's ability to execute and kill inmates. We should abolish capital punishment. We're the only Western developed country that still executes prisoners. And my work with wrongful convictions has shown me that many people that we've executed over the past 100 years were actually very innocent. Of the 1,650 people who've been exonerated in this country since 1989, I don't know the exact number, but more than 100 of them were exonerated from death row. They were on death row when they were exonerated for crimes they did not commit. So I think that's we should never execute an innocent person in this country, and we should not even take that risk. We should abolish capital punishment. We and Iran and China are among the only countries in the world that still execute criminals, and I think it's just a terrible, immoral thing. So I would abolish that. That's one government function I would abolish. Stop killing your own citizens. I would stop the criminalization of recreational drug use. During the Prohibition, the United States learned that if you prohibit people from drinking alcohol or committing other sins, which some people don't think they should do, when you prohibit something that people want to do, they will do it anyway, and you'll make them criminals, and then you create a whole criminal culture, which is what we did during Prohibition. It was a terrible mistake, and we repealed Prohibition when we realized that. But we're doing the same thing again by criminalizing marijuana and all other recreational drugs, up including heroin, methamphetamines, crack cocaine, We should legalize those drugs and legalize others and regulate them and tax them, just as we've done and are doing now for marijuana in several states. We've legalized them in Colorado, Washington, Oregon, for medical use, but also for public use. And we are decreasing their use. We're decreasing the abuse of these drugs. Portugal has taken the lead in decriminalizing all drugs. And what happens when people abuse those drugs is, and they're observed in public, or someone has filed a complaint, is those people are referred to treatment. They're not put in prison. They're put into treatment, just as alcoholics are referred to treatment nowadays. We used to put them in prison too, but we now treat them, and we should treat drug abusers. Not all people who take drugs abuse them, but to those who do abuse them, and they should be referred to treatment and not put in prison. Of the federal prison population, something like 200,000 people, 50% of them or more are there because of drug-related crimes, dealing, using. And by the way, if you can't just legalize use, you have to legalize the distribution and selling of drugs. I would legalize it all and work with other countries to legalize it all. Now, as for cutting spending, I certainly think we have to cut spending in many areas because otherwise we can't pay for the things that I think we should increase. One obvious cut is to cut military spending. As I said earlier, this country spends more on weapons to kill people than the next 9 countries in the world combined. It's appalling how much money we spend and to kill other people. I would reduce and cut subsidies to carbon extraction industries. We have an oil depletion allowance. We have depreciation for people digging coal out of the ground. We should stop providing incentives to people who bring carbon out of the ground. We should leave all the carbon that's in the ground because that's where it should stay. If we bring it out of the ground, it will be used and it will be burned, and it will raise the carbon dioxide and increase climate warming. So we should stop that. So those are a few things that I would cut. If we legalized recreational drug use, we would decrease our prison population, which is currently at about 2 million people total, which is the largest per capita imprisonment rate in the world. We imprison more people per capita than every other country in the world. If we released half those people, we would increase the number of taxpayers, and we would decrease the amount spent on prisons. So by all those things that I mentioned, we could save a lot of money. By taxing drug use, we could increase revenue, which would bring me to your next question.
All right. Are there any functions of government you would like to add to or increase? Are there any departments that don't exist that you think should exist? Is there anything within some departments that should be increased?
Well, yes, I like the way you first put that, the first part. I just thought of something, which is that we should have a United States Peace Academy, and we should have a World Peace Academy as well. How can it be that we have 3 or 4 military academies and we don't have a peace academy? We should reverse our priorities. We should have a much larger peace academy teaching nonviolence and negotiation, mediation, and we should export that learning to the rest of the world. That's what we should be known for. So that would be a new department, a Department of Peace, I would call it, or part of the Department of State, but we should have a peace academy, and we should teach the rest of the world and ourselves how to be nonviolent and how to resolve international and domestic disputes without violence. I would increase support for family planning and publicly funded abortion for women who do not have sufficient funds or insurance to pay for that. Currently, as you know, the government, the United States government, and most of the states do not use public funds to pay for abortion. Of course, they do use public funds to pay for all other medical needs of women and men, but they've chosen to stop funding for abortion. I think that's wrong. Abortion is a legal medical procedure. It should be available, and government should assist in payment for those people who don't have funds for family planning or for abortion. I believe that very strongly. We should increase the funding and incentives for sustainable energy, primarily wind and solar. The solar electricity industry is growing very fast. The cost to generate a kilowatt hour is decreasing, but we need to spend much more to make that more efficient and to spread the use of electric generation through solar and wind and tidal as well. The sooner we can make all the energy that humans need, produce it from sustainable sources, the better off the earth will be. I would increase funding for higher education, including online colleges. I would increase the public high schools. I would increase the age at which people should receive a free public education to include public colleges. And I would stress we could reduce the cost of higher education through the greater use of online education. I would increase the funding for space exploration. Together with all other nations, we should have a United Nations space program. It's one of those activities that everyone on the earth looked up at the sky in 1969 and thought they might see a glimpse of Neil Armstrong taking his first step on the moon. Every human being knew about that or aspired to that and shared in that human endeavor. And I think we should increase our funding for space exploration. A recent flyby Pluto was something that many humans watched. We should increase the funding for activities of the United Nations, which is woefully underfunded, especially its peacekeeping activities, taking militaries from different countries and sending them to countries to keep the peace. I think elections should be publicly funded. In this country, we have a terrible tradition of people able to contribute large amounts of money. And, of course, when people are elected, those large amounts of money require some form of payback. And we've taken many bad decisions because of that. In Maine, we have a public election funding system where candidates have to get signatures and token contributions, $5 each. Once you meet a threshold of signatures and token contributions, you're eligible for a limited amount of public funding. You can't spend more than that. And so that would limit the amount of money spent for elections. And it also would return this country essentially to one person, one vote. Right now, if you're wealthy, you have many more votes, effectively. It would reduce the influence of money in politics, which was made much worse by the recent decision by the Supreme Court, Citizens United case, which basically said that Congress could not regulate the amount of money that corporations spend on elections. Well, I think we should, by constitutional amendment, we should reverse that decision, and we should hold, by constitutional amendment, that corporations are not citizens. They are public creations, and they can be regulated by law, and they should be. We should not allow them to contribute. And that applies to unions as well, I believe. Corporations and unions should not be contributing to election campaigns. And it would, by the way, it would release politicians from the large amount of time they use to raise funds. I've seen estimates that politicians spend 20, 30% of their time just making calls, attending fundraising to raise money for their next campaign. It used to be that an election, in 1 year, you'd start up a committee and you'd raise money that year and you'd run. Now, you start raising money for the presidency, some people do, 4 years before you run. We become really obsessed with raising money, and we should stop that and publicly fund elections. So those are three or four. There's several things that I would do. I would increase funds if I could. Now, bear in mind, the presidents don't increase funding by themselves. They need to work with Congress. They need to change laws in order to increase support for all those things that I just described. And I would work with Congress, hopefully, to negotiate fair compromises on all those issues and ask the public to assist in the resetting of priorities. And I'm confident that that if elected to Congress, would see that the people want a more peaceful world. They want their money to be spent for things that are healthier for human beings than weapons.
Can you describe your stance on taxation?
Sure. Taxes, as I think Winston Churchill said, or many people have said, is the price we pay for a civilized society. We have to have taxes. And the best tax system is a system that fairly taxes many different activities, income taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, profits taxes, corporate taxes. And they should all be administered, however, with a maximum of simplicity. It's obscene that the current federal income tax code is something like 80,000 pages. The tax code, I would ask the Congress to reform the tax system, create flat taxes, what I call progressive flat taxes, which would eliminate a vast amount of the credits and incentives, disincentives, and complexities of the tax system. American citizens should not need an accountant and a lawyer to help them pay their taxes. In many countries, you don't need to. In many countries, Japan comes to mind, your taxes are taken out of your paychecks, and you're paid by individuals, not by families, and it's not complex to pay your taxes. So that's one thing taxes should be, as I say, simple. Government expenditures should be explicit rather than hidden in tax credits and deductions. If we want to spend money for solar energy, we should spend it. Or if we do spend that money with tax credits, we should account for it so that the public knows that last year tax credits in the budget were the equivalent of X billion dollars. And we should publicly state what these government expenditures are, whether they're explicit or implicit. In the incentive system, so I think taxes, I think too many people, have this panacea idea that reducing taxes will improve the economy. No, that's been proved over and over again that taxes are a small aspect of economic activity, a small aspect of economic growth. In fact, it's not known too much that Ronald Reagan increased taxes when he needed to balance his budgets. So it's not true that lowering taxes is absurd. For example, if taxes are reduced to zero, the economy and the country would be in chaos. We have to have significant taxation to pay for the services that we want. It reminds me of questionnaires or polls that are sometimes taken of people that, do you think Congress is doing a good job? And many people say no. Do you think your congressman is doing a good job? Yes. And the same thing with taxes. Do you think taxes should be eliminated or reduced? They say yes. But when they say, do you think that funding for education should be limited? No, we need funding for education. Do you think funding for the Environmental Protection Agency should be decreased? No, we need government funding for environmental protection. So it's when you get down to the things that people want. All these things the government does now, we do them because people want them. And in some cases, they're misinformed, like with the military. But we need taxes, and we should administer the tax system as fairly and simply as possible.
You've already touched on this a few times, but I always ask it.
Sure.
Can you describe your stance on the abortion, pro-choice issue?
Yes. I think that every American and every human being of reproductive age should have access to effective contraception. And every woman should have access to safe and legal abortion. It's a medical procedure. I'll just state to you very simply what Roe versus Wade said. It said that when a fetus is conceived, it has the potential for life. And as that fetus grows, it has increasing claim on life. But the woman's right to life is more important than the fetus until the fetus grows to a certain age. And the older it grows, the more rights it has. And after 6 months, it takes a rather severe medical emergency for a woman to undergo an abortion. But those are decisions that should be made by women and their doctors. And it's never an easy decision for any woman, and I certainly can't speak for women, but I try. It's no woman wants to have an abortion. They come because of mistakes in judgment or mistakes in technical in the contraceptives that were used. Many contraceptives fail quite often, and women and their children should not be penalized because of those mistakes. So whenever women want to have an abortion, they should have access to it, regardless of their ability to pay. And around the world, there should be exactly the same. No religion, no sexism should get in the way of men and women's abilities to use contraception. As I said earlier, I had a vasectomy in my 20s. Vasectomy should be more widely used. Men should take greater responsibility for contraception, and vasectomy is the most effective male contraceptive, and more men should take advantage of it. So yes, I mentioned it several times. It's something I believe in very strongly. Ever since I was in college, I became a feminist, and I took a demography course at Yale by a man named Lincoln Day, who is still alive. He's still alive, I should say. And he wrote a book called Too Many Americans, which was the inspiration for my recent book, Too Many Humans. We are destroying the earth with too many people, and we have to bring our birth rates down, and contraception and abortion must be available to everyone.
And you've already touched on this a little bit, but let's see if we can go more in depth if you want
Sure.
to. What role should our military play in the world?
Well, we should have a vastly reduced military from what we have now and have had since World War II. Yes, our military did a wonderful work in World War II to eliminate fascism and Nazism. It was a terrible scourge. We should have learned, however, that military solutions are terrible. We should never have dropped 2 atomic bombs, for example. We did, so we have to live with that. But we should reduce the scope of nuclear weapons and eliminate nuclear weapons. We should contribute to the United Nations peacekeeping forces. So when there are troubles in the world that need military solutions, it should be the United Nations that sends the military with the consent of all the countries in the world and not just one country. I think there's been a good precedent. The United Nations has kept the peace in several countries. They kept the peace between Israel and Syria to a large extent. And in the Congo, there are United Nations peacekeepers. Not all are successful, but the United States should not feel that it is the peacekeeper of the world. And in fact, as I mentioned before, we actually have been the instigator of war in the world, much to our shame. In my generation, we created the Vietnam War, and we destroyed the lives of hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese and Americans, and costly and limitless amounts of treasure for a war that was a terrible mistake. Vietnam wanted to unite North and South, and there was a leader that many people thought was the appropriate leader, a man named Ho Chi Minh. And by the way, Ho Chi Minh asked President Truman for a copy of the Declaration of Independence after World War II, because he wanted to model his country after our own. And President Truman was advised not to send him a copy of the Declaration of Independence because he was communist. But we didn't start the Vietnam War, but we made it into a vast war that it should not have been. We started the Iraq War, the war that George W. Bush started. The war that George H.W. Bush fought with many other nations was a necessary war, I believe. It was short, and he made the correct decision not to invade Iraq at that time. His son should have learned from that mistake. So I reduced the size of the military. One problem with having a huge military and having advanced weapons is you're tempted to use them, and that's what President Obama has used quite so often. We should not be using drones around the world to kill people. We create more terror, more revolutionaries. We create more people who want to kill people by use of our drones and smart bombs. In short, I think violence should never be our first response, and we should only use it if it's the only alternative, such as national self-defense. And national self-defense has not been used by this country really since World War II. Korea was a war that I think was necessary, but it was the United Nations war. We led the United Nations forces to repel the invasion of South Korea by North Korea. The mistake, however, was for Douglas MacArthur to threaten to invade China or push North Korea back to the Yalu River. So the United Nations should be the primary military force in the world, and the state should spend far less on it.
How would you handle the problem of, well, maybe it's not a problem.
Sure.
I'll try and be as objective as possible. How would you handle the issue of immigration and border security?
Well, immigration and border security are functions of nationalism, and the world is becoming more and more united. Country borders are decreasing. People want to move for personal or political reasons. In this country, we move from state to state. We don't even call it immigration. We just call it moving. In Europe, you can move among European Union countries much more easily than you used to be able to. I'm not even sure if they call people moving from Germany to France immigration anymore. It's just movement. So the world is, and nobody immigrates from the earth to anywhere else. So immigration is an earth problem that is changing. But given the current realities, I think countries that have immigration quotas, we should enforce our border security. People should not come into this country illegally. They should come legally or not at all. And we should deport the people who come here illegally. Now, for many, many years, however, that policy was not enforced. Our borders were not so secure. So we have approximately 11 million people here who have been here for a long time. I support President Obama's decision to offer them some kind of route to legality, whether it's called amnesty or not. That's something we should do. But a bigger problem is that we should reduce the need for immigration. You know, I read just recently that actually the number of people coming and going from Mexico and South America into this country has actually reversed in the last several years because of the Great Recession and the lack of jobs in this country. Actually, many illegal immigrants have gone back to their countries of origin over the past several years. Now, I'm not sure about that, but illegal immigration is not an eternal problem. It comes and goes with economies and population growth. We should support population education, population contraception, population control in all the world and in Latin America, and the availability of abortion. People immigrate because there's not enough food, not enough economic benefit in a country. Another big immigration problem is in Europe right now, as you know, and unfortunately, a lot of that immigration problem is the result of American military. The Syrian, hundreds of thousands of Syrians have fled their country into neighboring countries and now more into Europe because they're fleeing a war that the United States didn't start, but we encouraged the revolutionaries in Syria to keep fighting, and we destabilized that country, and also Iraq, and ISIS has done the rest. So the Syrian immigrants into Europe, I think, are somewhat our responsibility. African immigrants were seeking to get into Europe. Many of them are seeking a better life, and we should do more economic aid, and we should provide contraceptives to allow people in Africa to have the number of children they want, not the numbers they have to have because they don't have contraceptives. So I think we could reduce the immigration problem where it is a problem worldwide by encouraging economic development and encouraging family planning and contraceptives, and by not creating political instability, which leads people to want to flee their country. So that's generally how I would handle immigration and border security.
How do you perceive the issues of race and discrimination in the United States? Do we still face challenges? How do you deal with these issues?
Well, it's extremely important around the world, race and discrimination. The United States, I should say, I'm a white male, I'm Caucasian, I've led a fairly privileged life, middle class, white male, gone to private high school and private college, which was later funded by a scholarship and then GI Bill money, but still, as a white male, I've been privileged. And I hope, like John Kennedy and FDR and Harry Truman and Lyndon Johnson, I have the wisdom and the empathy to see that many, many others of different races and colors have not had those advantages. The United States, one thing I feel the most proud about this country is that we have anti-discrimination laws in states and in the country. The Equal Employment Opportunity Act, for example, the laws against discrimination, housing, and education. We have led the world, I believe, or one of the leaders in the world in political and legal efforts to eliminate or reduce the impact of discrimination. And we should export that knowledge and those laws to other countries. We should have, for example, when we were in Iraq, or we should have taught the Iraqis how to implement policies so that Sunnis would not discriminate against Shia and vice versa. You can't compel races and religious groups to like or love other groups and races, but we can, by law, require them not to discriminate against them. When you discriminate against someone, you lead to long-term emotional damage and hatred and sometimes violence. So it's a long-term, forever, shall we say, human problem. But we can lead the world, just as I recommended earlier. We be part of the Academy for Peace. The Academy should teach non-discrimination, as we've done very, very well. We have a black president. Some countries have had women presidents. We haven't had one yet, but so we're not the leader in that regard. But we still have. That would add to the issues of race and discrimination, gender discrimination. We need to bring women up to parity, equality in our government and the governments around the world. I'm convinced that if women ran this country and ran the world, we would have far less violence. Not always true. Some women favor violence and military action more than others. But generally, women, I think, with a profound sense of bringing life into the world as a gender, understand. So the race issue, we have to decrease its power. As Rodney King, the late Rodney King, said ever so well, why can't we all just get along? Why can't we teach the rest, and I'm saying myself, why can't we teach the rest of the world how we can get along and do it without violence?
What role should the federal government play in healthcare? You've covered that a little bit, but
yeah. Well, I won't repeat the answers about population control and contraception, but every American and every human being should have the access to adequate health care. The Europeans do this very well at prices that are less cost per person than the United States. We have the most expensive medical care system in the world, and we leave too many people without medical care. The Obamacare has reduced that problem, but we need it much better. It's embarrassing to be an American who exists at the same time as the number of homeless people we have, the people who have no medical care, and all they can do is go to emergency rooms, which is the inappropriate place to receive most medical care. But the federal government, so in addition to ensuring that all Americans have health care, the federal government also provides research for medical advances and regulates medical devices so that we don't allow the people to be subjected to fraud or medicines that are harmful. And just recently, a woman who led this country, who blocked the importation of thalidomide, a European drug, into this country until it was properly tested. She saved hundreds of lives and prevented the deforming lives of hundreds and thousands more because she said, no, this drug has to be tested before it's used in this country. And then the results came from Europe, where hundreds of thousands of children were born with deformed limbs, and a tragedy. And that's what the government can do, testing of drugs before they're released to the public. That's what the federal government can do.
What priority would you give repair of infrastructure? What should the role of the federal government be in maintaining infrastructure?
Well, government. One of the things government does is provide the infrastructure, the transportation, the power, ensure that there's regulated power system, power utilities, the water systems, and local government should do that most of the time. But where there are interstate capacities, railroads, ships, airplanes, the federal government has a primary role, and we should maintain those systems to be the best in the world. Sadly, our railroad system is not nearly as good as that in Europe and Japan, and so the government should do more to improve our transportation, our waste disposal, our water transportation systems. So we need to do more. And but I would stress, however, that I'm, as I said earlier, I'm opposed to indebtedness. I'm opposed to borrowing money unless it's a real emergency. It's not an emergency to build roads or repair roads. That should be funded through taxation or gas taxation, taxes on gas and oil, and regular taxation. We should pay for the building of roads and not issue bonds. It's a perfectly predictable expense, and we should tax ourselves to pay for those things as they're built.
Where do you stand on the issue of personal privacy and the need to protect our nation from terrorism? What's the balance between protecting our rights but also protecting the internal and external threat of terrorism?
Yeah. Well, first, I would say that the word terrorism is overused and has been abused. Many people who we call terrorists are frankly criminals. They do violent things. And they should be prosecuted and jailed. Many people so-called terrorists are revolutionaries. They oppose the government. ISIS is, I would say, is a revolutionary organization that's seeking to overthrow and replace governments in Syria and Iraq. I don't think we gain anything by calling them terrorists. Terror is something that you fear when somebody you think somebody is going to harm you, but mostly these people are simply violent. And we should treat what's currently called international terrorism as a crime, and we should prosecute them and punish them. And if we can't prove their criminality, we should release them. Like Guantanamo, for example, should be emptied. There should be nobody there, especially young people who were picked up and arrested 50 years ago. But back to personal privacy, I actually believe that we could have more surveillance of Americans through such things as video cameras in public places. The Europeans do this quite well. A lot of crimes are solved because there are security cameras in a lot more public places, a lot more private places. And I'm not worried about being watched by a camera when I'm walking around a city. But I think there obviously is a need for privacy. We have the Fourth Amendment in this country. The government should not intrude. We should not be tapping our phone lines. We should not be watching our telephones. But I don't think we need to do that to protect our nation from terrorists. We need to do it. We need to protect our country from criminals and people who would invade that privacy. I'm more concerned about so that's my basic answer. I think we overreacted to the 2001 attack on the World Trade Center. It was a terrible tragedy, but it was not should not have triggered a war. It was a terrible event, but we didn't need to change our laws to deprive our citizens of their privacy in response to that single incident.
All right. This is kind of a sensitive topic, but it matters to some voters.
Sure.
It matters to other voters, but it matters enough, I think I should ask it. What role does faith, religion, spirituality, etc. play in your life, and what type of role would it play for you as president? And again, this is not a religious litmus test. It's just something many voters are interested in.
Sure. No, that's a fair question. I've been an atheist since I was 14 years old. I don't believe there is a deity, a God, and I don't believe there ever has been. I come to that belief through through my education. I was actually a confirmed Episcopalian. I was brought up as a Christian, an Episcopalian, like George Bush's actually. But I've been an atheist since 14. However, I certainly recognize the rights of other people to have a religion. Ironically, we talked earlier about terrorists. It's fundamentalism, which is a big source of so-called terrorism or criminal activity. People who believe that their religious beliefs entitle them to harm others in the name of that religion. I think that's a mistake. All fundamentalists, whether they're Christian fundamentalists or Jewish fundamentalists or Muslim fundamentalists, should not commit violence on each other or on other religions in the name of their religion. And to combat fundamentalism, I think we should increase our global education and the global spread of science to teach people that there are other explanations for the world we live in other than God, God or a deity. So I think that I certainly would not want to impose my atheism on other people, but I also don't want religious people to impose their religious views on anybody around the world. We have enough guides for moral conduct without the resort to a supernatural being. The golden rule does not have to be a religious rule. You should do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's not a religious rule. It's a moral rule. And I think there are enough guides to morality. We don't need religion. But if people wish to believe in deity, that's certainly their right.
Right. We're coming to the close of the interview. A couple more questions.
Okay.
Be a political forecaster, or just be a world events forecaster.
Sure.
Predict maybe one or two problems facing our country in the future that few or maybe no people are talking about. What would you do to prepare America for it?
Okay. Well, it would really be a soothsayer to be able to tell you about problems that no one is talking about. After all, it's a big country. Somebody is talking about everything. But I would say two things. One, we are going to have more global financial crises until we come to a single global currency. Currency crises were a serious part of the 2008 financial crisis. Currencies of Argentina, Russia, other countries have collapsed over the past 15 years. It's a terrible thing to happen, and it's contagious. And we've been lucky, frankly, that they haven't engulfed the world. And we could reduce or eliminate the risk of currency crises, not financial crises, but currency crises, by implementing a single global currency. It's very easy to do. We just expand what the euro has done and do it for the whole world. Now, granted, a monetary union is not a panacea. It doesn't do everything for everybody, but it eliminates one major problem with the financial system in the world, which is multiple currencies, which can crash at any time when people lose confidence in those currencies. If we had one currency, there would be no currency crises, no need for foreign exchange reserves, and no transaction costs when we buy different types of currency. It would just be one currency, just as in this country we have $1. The other major problem facing our country, I would say, in the world, is overpopulation. Yes, there are many people who are talking about it now, but not enough. And even many people are talking about climate change, but not enough people are talking about a major cause of climate change, which is too many people. 7.3 billion people create many more pollutants, many more gases going into the atmosphere than 4 billion people would, which is the population of the Earth when I was much younger, or 1 billion, which is what I think the world should move back to. So if we could get ahead as president, if I could lead the country to avoid those two major crises or prevent further deterioration by working with other countries to promote a single global currency. And by the way, you could achieve a global currency by simply merging the dollar and the euro and the Japanese yen. If we merged those three currencies tomorrow, we would have the single global currency, and other countries would join that currency. As soon as you reach the tipping point, countries would join. And if we could reduce the human birth rate to below the death rate in my presidency, presidency, we could save the world from a major problem that not enough people are talking about.
All right. Now, everybody has things that they're good at. Everybody has things that they're not so good at. What are some of the things that you may not be so good at, and what would you do to compensate for those things?
Well, I know very little about a lot. And I probably have made several mistakes. In fact, about issues on this. Sorry about that phone. Hopefully someone else will answer that. My giant campaign staff will hopefully answer that phone. But I would surround myself. So I know very little about some things. Excuse me. I'm sorry. That's
fine.
I couldn't do that. I would surround myself with advisors who know what who know their issues more than I do, and so I would hopefully prevent myself from making decisions or recommendations that are unwise or lack sufficient information. So I would constantly. The big danger when you're a president is that you surround yourself with people who agree with you, and that's dangerous. So I would surround myself with people who know a lot, and I would keep the doors open to people who disagree with me, and hopefully avoid decisions. That's one, I think, the big reason why President George W. Bush made disastrous mistakes with Iraq is that he surrounded himself with the vice president and many others who were urging him to go to war, with a few noble exceptions. So that's a weakness, is to think you know something when in fact you don't know enough. And I think another weakness perhaps is that I'm impatient sometimes. Even though I take the long view on some major issues, I'm impatient for solutions, and I have to slow down sometimes and listen to others. So those are two things, is to avoid acting with misinformation or insufficient information, and avoid trying to act too quickly.
Are there any other issues you would like to discuss, areas that weren't touched on by the previous questions?
No, I think I've covered most of the important things I wanted to say. I didn't mention there are some issues like the moving to the metric system. That's something that some people don't think is that important. But Lincoln Chafee, my competitor Lincoln Chafee, has argued that the United States should join the rest of the world and move to the metric system. We're already there. We already drink our soda in 2-liter bottles. We already take our medicine in milligrams. So it isn't, and our manufacturers, our exporters, produce products measured in metric system. So it's not as big a jump as when Jimmy Carter tried to move us to the metric system 40 years ago. But I think that's something that we could do, and it would improve our standing in the world. It would make us not seem like we are apart from the rest of the world.
Actually, I heard Ted Cruz wants to move us back to the qubit, but
well, that's interesting, and it's that's interesting. I'm not sure I want to believe that, but
no, I'm joking.
Oh, you're joking. Okay, it was a joke. All right, thank you. But it really is something that is an overwhelming case for moving to the metric system. In weights and measures, we led the world toward decimal dollar systems, and so their bidders, for example, now measure their coins in tenths of a cent and pennies rather than shillings and whatever else it was. So we need to move to the metric system, which was begun by the French after the French Revolution, and we ought to finally join the rest of the world. And I would just say that if I haven't already said it enough, is, and I repeat, funny, Rodney King, a black man who was terribly beaten by police in California, he said one of the most profound things that a human has said in the last 20 years, which is asking rhetorically, why can't we all get along? And I would ask that question to anybody who urges violence or anybody who's committed violence. Step back a minute and ask, why can't we just get along? And that would be a major theme of my presidency.
All right, and time for some closing remarks. In 2 minutes or less, tell us why we should vote for you.
Well, I'm Lee. I thank you. Thank you very much for this interview. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I apologize for that. Not being able to silence that other phone. It's actually my wife's phone, and she has a home office here, and I forgot to shut it off before.
No problem.
But in any case, I believe I'm a reasonable person. I believe in reason, and I'm willing to seek compromise in order to make progress towards solving problems. I think the door should always be open to those who disagree. And I'm truly and deservedly, I think, humble about my place in the world and humanity's place in the universe. I think one reason why George W. Bush was elected was that he told the people before his election that he was a humble person. He thought the United States should have a humble position in the world. Unfortunately, he was advised later that we should be the policeman of the world. It was a major, major, major mistake. So I'm humble personally, and I think we Americans should be humble in the world, and humanity should be humble in the universe. I'm very concerned about the fate of humanity and the earth, and want to bring other people in this country to that same level of concern so we can reduce the scope of the issues which have bedeviled us so far, like the issues we've talked about, racism, religious differences, sexism, and violence. Those issues, we now face a much bigger problem, which is the survival of the planet, survival of humanity on the planet. Not just survival, but survival with any type of hope for good lives and healthy lives. We have to stop the extinction of species. We have to stop the polluting of our atmosphere, which we're continuing to do. And the climate change is a warning. It's going to get worse before it gets better, and we have to do more. And I don't mean to build more icebreakers. We don't need to explore for oil in the Antarctic. We need to leave the oil in the Arctic right where it is, which is in the ground, or underground, or underwater. So I'm very concerned about the fate of humanity. One issue I didn't mention before is we must reduce the high level of income and wealth inequality in this country and in the world. It's obscene that so few people own so much. The top 1% of the people in the earth own something like 60% of the wealth and income. That's obscene. I would close with those. The income and wealth inequality is unhealthy for the economy of the world, and it's also unhealthy for democracy, our democracy and democracies elsewhere. You have to have a sustainable middle class to have a healthy democracy. And if you have very few rich and everybody else poor, you're not going to have a healthy democracy. You have a recipe for revolution, as the French learned in 1789. And many other countries, the Russians learned in 1917. We have to have far more wealth and income, fairness, and a smaller level of inequality. So I hope this interview succeeds and is listened to by people. And I hope people will go to my website, www.morrisonbonpasse.org, and read about my positions on issues and send me questions, any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bonpasse, for the interview. Thanks again to my listeners for listening to 2016 Presidential Candidate Interviews. Be sure to check back in the future for more candidate interviews. Have a good day, and remember to keep informed, passionate, and most of all, involved. Thanks again, Mr. Bonpasse.
Thank you. Have a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.